Hello and welcome to Stuart Saturday Live with me, your hostess, Andrea Zuvich, the 17th century lady. My guest today will be author and historian Nicola Cornick, who has recently released a historical fiction work called The Other Gwyn Girl. She'll be with us in a few minutes. Before I go any further, I'd just like to point out that my wall is looking very different right now. It was wallpapered last week in a reproduction 17th century wallpaper. I bought it about 3 years ago and was finally able to get it done, and I love it. I'm in the same room I usually use, which is my office, but I thought our audience might be interested in having a look. For those listening just to the audio, it is 2 shades of yellow in color with a motif of flowers, fruit, and leaves. I'm so happy with it. Yes, I am wearing a patch. For those of you who know about restoration, fashion, and beauty trends, they were used to cover up facial blemishes and pimples, and I got one this morning. So, remarkably, it is something that is available at local chemists like Boots. So I was very surprised to see that something that was so much a trend in the late 17th century is still available. But now they have something like, I think, salicylic acid for to improve the actual pimple. So I'd like to talk about a few books that are being released within the next week or so, or now. I'd like to congratulate Justine Brown on the publication of her book, The Private Life of James II. My exclusive interview with Justine was published this week, yesterday, in fact. And if you are a fan of James II, you won't want to miss that. Also, I'd like to say felicitations to Charles Cordell on his new release, The Keys of Hell and Death. And this is also set in the 17th century, or more specifically, during the English or British Civil Wars. Charles contributed a guest post this week, and it's also on my website, and it's entitled English Civil War Fiction, Research, Realism, and Relevance. So if you fancy reading my interview with Justine or reading Charles's guest post, head on over to my website, www.andreazuvich.com, or also www.17thcenturylady.com. I would also like to congratulate Sophie Shoreland on the release of her new book, The Lost Queen, The Surprising Life of Catherine of Braganza, Britain's Forgotten Monarch, which I only just found out about a few weeks ago, but I'm really eager to read it. Catherine was King Charles II's wife from 1662 until his death in 1685. I really came to admire Catherine when I was writing my biography of her rival, Barbara Villiers, and I felt keenly how overlooked Catherine was and how desperately in need of a biography she was. So I'm really excited about that one. In fact, I'm excited about a whole lot of things because so much research has been done in recent years, and that is finally bearing fruit with the many Stuart-era publications that are coming out. Not only that, but the miniseries Mary and George, about George Villiers, 1st Duke of Buckingham, and his mother, Mary, which, despite the flaws mentioned by my colleagues elsewhere, really seems to have piqued the interest of viewers in the Stuart period, and I welcome that. Things are changing. Why, just a few days ago, there was a post on X where a TV production company was looking for a historian of the 1600s to work as an advisor on a new TV series. Who knows what's going to come about with that? I did get in touch with them, but I haven't heard back anything yet. I probably won't, but that doesn't change the fact that these productions are being made and viewers are sitting up and taking notice. And I think that is something to celebrate. Anyway, it's time for our history chat. Today's guest is the best-selling author of works including several set in the 17th century, such as The Winter Garden, about figures involved in the gunpowder plot. Also, House of Shadows, about Elizabeth Stuart, the Winter Queen. And most recently, The Other Gwyn Girl. This book follows the life of Rose Gwyn, Nell Gwyn's sister. Joining us live from Oxford, England, please welcome Nicola Cornick. Hello, Nicola.
Hello, Andrea. Thank you so
Hi.
much for inviting me to join you
Oh,
on Stuart Saturday Live. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. I'm so happy you were able to make it. I had the pleasure of doing a talk with you at a conference at the University of Oxford about 8 years ago now. Can you believe that? There we are.
Oh, I can't believe, oh my goodness.
This is a long time
Isn't
ago.
it extraordinary how much time goes by? It was a
Yes.
real pleasure to work with you, though, and
Yeah.
that's made me
Thank
think we should do it again.
Yes, I think we had a fantastic topic. I mean, we did
Yes.
secret Stuart marriages,
Mm,
navigating the politics of love at the Stuart courts, and I thought that was so
very
much
interesting.
fun.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's a
Um,
very interesting topic. I always thought, I mean, it's really interesting, isn't it, whether or not these marriages actually took place, the fact that there were so many stories and rumours about them. Why is that in that particular era of history? I still find that such an interesting subject.
oh yes, there are so many, and some of them are really truly romantic stories, and I find that really interesting.
Yes.
Um, I remember actually at that event, I was quite new to the whole scene, and there were many famous authors,
Mm.
including yourself, and there were history and historical fiction authors, and one of these people I had looked up to since my childhood. Unfortunately, I was it's one of those cases where you finally meet someone that you've admired and it's not quite right. And I was rather put off by their behavior, which was a bit mean and sort of petulant, I found. Yeah. And but it was so nice to meet you and chat with you because you were by then already a best-selling author and very well known already. And yet you were so kind and warm and welcoming to me, just a newbie really at the time. And so, folks, she's not only a fantastic author, she's super nice too. So that's a bonus.
Oh, that's such a kind thing to say. And, do you know, I've had a similar experience to you in meeting one of my heroes or heroines,
Oh,
one of my favourite historians, who
mhm.
again just did not turn out to be as I might have hoped that they would. So I think,
Mm,
I mean, it's a shame, isn't it? Because they
it
say you should
is.
never meet your heroes, but I
Mm,
mean, you want to, and if they turn out to be nice people, then that's great. But yes, it does
yeah,
rather shatter the illusion otherwise, doesn't it?
it certainly does, unfortunately. Well, you have a great love for the 17th century, and that's made clear in your lovely works. Um, so let's talk about Nell Gwyn. She was one of the great mistresses of King Charles II. Um, she was known and beloved for her down-to-earth nature, and she was probably the most popular of his mistresses, and yet remains somewhat of an enigma. There is uncertainty, for example, about her origins. Some claim that she was born in London, others that she was born in Oxford, and even others Hereford. Uh, we don't know for certain who her father was, but we do know that her mother and her sister had a very difficult time, to say the least. Could you tell us about the Gwyn family, please?
Yes, well, thank you. As you say, Nell's background and her origins are a bit obscure, a bit mysterious. She wasn't nobly born, so of course there aren't a lot of records. Either, you know, there were possibly no records at the time, and also she herself wasn't clear on her family history at all. In fact, when she had a coat of arms made for herself, she did incorporate some of the elements of the heraldry of the Gwyn the Welsh Gwyn family. But at that stage, in fact, she didn't know that she was part of that family. And although it's still disputed as to what her precise origins were, there are historians now who do believe that she came from that family. I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. But I think maybe part of the problem was, the theory now is that she was descended from the illegitimate son of an Oxford clergyman. And so nobody was going to really want to keep a record of that, or make make much of it, because of course this chap actually had two sons, one of whom was, I think, her father, and an uncle as well, but because he was obviously, well, certainly forbidden from marrying, but also shouldn't have been producing any children, nobody was going to kind of keep a record of it. So it's actually, it kind of feels sort of appropriate for Nell, really, doesn't it, that there might be that kind of scandal about her origins. But I think, and the other thing about, another thing about her that's so interesting, that kind of throws some light or why there is this confusion, is the fact that she was illiterate. And so we don't have any of her letters or any correspondence or any papers that she would have written herself directly, that would again throw any light on her background or her story. So almost everything that we know about Nell Gwyn is what other people tell us, and of course there's always going to be that bias from particular chroniclers, especially male ones, who might have a particular approach to a subject like Nell Gwyn. And in addition to that, she became a legend in her own lifetime. She encouraged those stories about her and all the things, just really to pick herself up. She was a terrific self-promoter. So out of all of that, it's very difficult to sort of find out what's behind all of this, what the truth is of her family and her background, and indeed even the things that happened to her during her life. As you mentioned, 3 places claim that she was born there: Oxford, London, and Hereford. Hereford even has a house on a street where they say this was where Nell Gwyn was born. And that's kind of feels again like it's part of her legend, really, that everybody wants a piece of Nell because she was so much fun. She was this kind of she embodied the spirit of that aspect of the Restoration age. So it feels as though we're going to claim Nell for our own. But in fact, I mean, I suppose maybe because I live near Oxford myself, I do favour the Oxford version of the story, which is again supported by one of her biographers, Peter Dewar, who thinks that is the most likely option for where she was born and where her early life happened, because there was a Captain Thomas Gwyn who was imprisoned for debt in Oxford, and died in Oxford jail, in fact. And he did belong to this junior branch of a Welsh gentry family. They weren't aristocracy, but they were from a good family. And he had fought for Charles I during the English Civil War. And this ties up with what we know later on, when Nell's sister Rose was herself imprisoned for debt, and she petitioned Charles II to be released because somebody wrote on her behalf. She didn't write; she was also illiterate. But the petition said, "Our father served yours in the late wars, and therefore our family has been ruined." So that kind of all fits together with this idea that they grew up in Oxford. Certainly after Thomas Gwyn died, I mean, we do know that at some point the family moved to London. When you get on to the next scandalous bit of the story, the famous bit about Nell and Rose's mother, old Ma Gwyn, who became the brothel madam, and these 2 small girls growing up in a brothel from a very young age, serving what they were calling strong waters, alcoholic drinks to the clients in the brothel, even when they were only small children. So neither of them received any kind of formal education. Both of the girls became orange girls at the theatre. Orange girls being not exactly a euphemism, since they did sell oranges, but they also obviously had this role carrying messages from gentlemen in the audiences to the actresses who they might want to have an assignation with. So there's a very sort of heavily, a very poor, very kind of desperate feel to the things that you had to do to survive, basically. And from a young age, I think Nell and Rose Gwynn both were kind of just doing what they had to do to live, to have enough food to put on the table. Obviously, we do know that Nell didn't. This wasn't good enough for Nell, just kind of serving refreshments to everybody else, and she wanted to be on the stage, and so she, and I mean, knowing that she was illiterate as well, makes her achievement in becoming an actress even more extraordinary, really, because she had to learn all of her lines by rote. So she would just repeat and repeat and repeat them until she got it all sort of worked out. But she would also improvise. So because she was like
really well known. Sorry, she was well known for her improvisational skills.
Absolutely, because she was so quick-witted and so. And because comedy was her thing, really. I think, as you know, everybody said, well, that Nell's no good at tragedy or drama, but her quick wits and her just her sort of high spirits, and indeed, I'm sure her cross-dressing and various other sort of fun things that she did kind of were all added to that sort of her sort of comedic personality. And I mean, just such an incredible achievement for a woman, I think, at that time, from a background like hers, to actually become a professional actress, which, of course, as we know, was such a new thing in England at that point. So quite from the whole, I mean, I always think rags to riches stories, it's kind of an easy way to describe these things, but actually in Nell's case, there is an element of that to her story, but largely because of her own determination and her own sort of efforts.
That's amazing. She was quite an extraordinary figure. And what was it about Rose Gwynn, her sister in particular, that captured your imagination and led you to write this book?
Well, I did intend to write about Nell when I started because, as you said, she's a larger-than-life personality. She's an extraordinary woman. There's so much there that you could write about, and it's so interesting. And you can't call her a feminist, but she was certainly, I mean, that would be an anachronism, but she was someone who determined her own path. So there were lots of reasons why I started off thinking, I really want to write about Nell. And I absolutely came to love Nell the more I researched her and the more I found out about her and wrote the story. I thought, as well as all this kind of wit and determination and all the rest of it, there was such a loyalty in her character to her roots and to her family. So I started to read a bit about her mother and about her sister. And it was as I was trying to find out more about Rose, who was her older sister by 3 or 4 years, perhaps. And I discovered, well, I didn't discover, that was the problem. I couldn't discover much about her at all. And of course, for me, I think almost all of the dual time books, fictional books that I've written have been based on the story of women, mostly. It is women, a couple of men maybe from the footnotes of history whose stories haven't really been told. So, of course, I was reading about Nell and I was trying to read about Rose. And I was thinking, well, Rose is the classic example of somebody like this, a woman who obviously, like all these people, was a witness to all the things that were going on, who lived in a similar sort of society. And yet, you don't know anything about her. We know we've got all these stories about Nell. Was Rose personality-wise, was she similar? There's so few actual records about her. I mean, what do we know? That she had the same start in life as Nell, in the sense of not having a formal education and then becoming an orange girl. But at some point, she must have felt, for whatever reason, that wasn't a career, in inverted commas, for her, and she became what was referred to in the records as a notorious thief. Now, of course, as you'll know, in that era, notorious could often mean habitual, as opposed to famous or infamous. And she was arrested quite a few times for theft. Extraordinarily, she mostly got away with it. I mean, she was known to be she was known to be a thief, but a very skillful one, very quick, very so people would know she swiped a loaf of bread, but they couldn't catch her in the act, kind of thing. So that was one of the things that intrigued me about her, and I thought, well, maybe that's just as Nell's superpower is being witty and charming and acting, maybe hers is being a very quick and cunning thief. Then, I mean, you couldn't really. I mean, this is, it's all a gift for a novelist, really. You couldn't really make these things up, because then I found out she'd married a highwayman, and I thought, well, this is ridiculous. You're a novelist, you're looking for a story. Here's Nell Gwynn, who marries a highwayman. So a highwayman called Captain John Castles. We don't know anything much about him, but that was her first husband. So I thought, well, honestly, there has to be a story here, doesn't there, between all of these sort of things. And the only other fact, really, that I could discover about her was that she married for a second time, from which I extrapolated that the highwayman probably came to a bad end, although who knows. But she married for a second time.
That's probably likely.
To someone called Guy Forster, who was a gentleman. And then she went off to live a life of blameless respectability, and you never hear another word from Rose. So I thought, well, not that you heard much from her in the first place, but between all these basic facts, there's such a interesting space. And of course, as a writer of fiction, that's where you think, oh, I can really fill those gaps with imagination here, and put a story together for Rose. And of course, the other great thing about it was that I could use Rose to observe Nell's life and Nell's lifestyle. So and have a contrast there. So that just felt like the way to go, and that's how Rose became the heroine of the story.
Right. I am really enjoying it. I'm currently on page 66, so I've got my copy here, and I've been so busy with my own book, doing the indexing and everything,
absolutely,
that I haven't had any time for myself. But I had a bit over the past few nights, and I was really getting into it. Now, it is a sort of two-story kind of book, and you mentioned this earlier. You said you used dual timelines. They could also be called time slips, I suppose. So there are parallels between the Gwen sisters in the 17th century and the sisters in the present time. I don't think I should go into any more detail about that, but I find it really interesting. I love how you did that.
Well, thank you. Yes, I do like. I wanted to write dual timeline for a long time. I've been doing it now for 9 years, and even before that, I had an idea of a story that I wanted to explore in that way, by having a separate historical and a contemporary thread to it, because I really like the lens that you can bring in the present to bear on the history of it. So you're telling the story, the historical story, in the time that you're writing a historical story, but you're also examining that story in the present. And so I really love exploring the influence of the past on the present. That's kind of one of my things a public historian. And of course, it does mean you can take a different perspective towards the events that went on. But actually, I think I said a little while ago as well. The Other Gwyn Girl, really, I suppose, as a novel, its emotional heart is about the relationship between sisters and between the sisters and their mothers. And there's going to be parallels and differences, of course.
I see. All right. Let's see. I think we might have lost her there for a moment. Let's see if we can get her back in. Might have been some technical situation. Let's see. All right. Yes, she has dropped. Oh, yes, you're back. Hello.
I don't know what happened there. I
don't know.
seem to have frozen.
Yes. Maybe the internet might be a bit funny right now. The joys of live broadcasting. Is that all right now? Let's see. We have her on our video, so we have a visual, but we're trying to work out the audio. Nicola?
Hello?
Hi. Can you hear us now?
Are we back? Oh dear! I feel like some kind of endangered animal that everybody's out looking for because I keep vanishing. That's technology for you, isn't it?
Yes.
Sorry, I think I was just talking about the dual timeline thing, wasn't it?
Yes.
And really the fact that I really love writing those two elements of the story that echo each other, I suppose. So in the contemporary storyline, in The Other Gwyn Girl, it was fun having the heroine Jess, who's in the shadow of a famous younger sister in the same way that Rose is with Nell. And that was very different, obviously. But another of the things that I have studied and enjoyed very much, again, I studied for my master's, but and wrote about celebrity through the ages, which is why there's quite often an element of modern or historical celebrity in the books, in the novels that I write, because I really love exploring that, and also the effect that had on people's lives. So I think I very much do that in this particular book.
Wow. Well, it works really well, and I can't wait to keep reading it. So hopefully I'll get some more time within the next few days, and then I'll do a review, and then we'll go from there. But I'm really enjoying it. Yeah. So the first book of yours that I read was House of Shadows, which is here. Yes. And I'm very lucky because mine is signed. Yes. So I'm very happy with that. Now, some of the most, I suppose, the most beloved Stuart figures are in this book. Could you tell us about Ashton House and also its Stuart connections and Elizabeth of Bohemia and Lord Craven and all those wonderful people, please?
Okay. Well, that's like, asking me. It's like giving me free range to talk on my favourite historical subject, and that's saying something.
You go ahead. You can do that here.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, well, firstly, House of Shadows, I think, was the book of my heart, because I mean, authors say that, and then they fortunately come up with another book of their heart as well. But I had wanted to write that book for so long. I'm lucky. I work as a guide and a historian at Ashdown, which is a 17th century hunting lodge. It was built in the 1660s for William, 1st Earl of Craven. And Craven is actually another of these characters, these people from history who was very well known at the time, particularly in the Restoration era after Charles the Second was restored. He was a close friend of Charles II, but he's been kind of lost from history. And again, another element of historical study that I think is fascinating is who gets remembered and who doesn't, and why, really.
Indeed, yes, that is very interesting.
I mean, because it is, when we're looking at all these people from these periods of history, there are some who are kind of nationally known now, like Nell Gwyn, and then there are people who, like William Craven, everybody would just say who. Even people who study the Stuart period probably would go who, because in a lot of ways he hasn't been considered to be a particularly influential character in the history of that particular era. But he was a royalist supporter during the civil wars, although he spent all of that time, well, that's a matter of debate, but he spent most of that time abroad at the court in exile of Elizabeth Stuart, Queen of Bohemia, of course, sister of Charles I, and aunt of Charles II. And again, Elizabeth is a figure who I just don't understand why she isn't more broadly known, and why she and her whole life and family and everything aren't more isn't made of that, because it's a spectacular story. I think, well, we say this about the whole 17th century, don't we? There are so many elements to it.
Yes.
Do you think, why is this not better known or more popular? How many times have we all been saying this? It's incredible.
Yes.
And Elizabeth, for me, is another example of that. The daughter of James I. She makes a what is supposed to be a marriage of convenience, but turns into a love match at the age of 16. She goes off to Germany, marries a German prince, goes off to Germany. He's offered the throne of Bohemia. He loses the throne of Bohemia very quickly afterwards. Yeah. They go into exile. They produce 13 children along the way, and all these incredible things happen to them and to all these offspring. Throw in a few wars and the 30 Years' War, the civil wars. It's an epic, isn't it? It really is. So
has anyone made a film about her life? Because it's crazy that it's not been done.
It is crazy. I totally agree with that. And I think when Nadine Ackerman brought out her can't have been that long ago, was it? Her biography, her fabulous biography of Elizabeth of Bohemia. She actually said then, I really hope that this prompts more popular historical interest in Elizabeth and in her story, because you could make a series like The Tudors. It would have to be either a huge epic film or a great long series, because after you've got through all the extraordinary things that happened with it to Elizabeth, then you could move on to the children. It is on a grand scale, isn't it? Like so much of the 17th century. And yet, yes. And one of the things I find really interesting is when visitors come to Ashdown House to look round, people are coming to find out about the history of the house. Sorry, I knew this would happen. I start talking about Ashdown, I go off on a tangent. I haven't even explained that Ashdown was supposed to have been built by William Craven for Elizabeth of Bohemia when she came back to England in 1660. So people do come there to because of its connections to Elizabeth. But a lot of the people who visit from places, say, like France or Germany or Holland, know all about Elizabeth. They know her history because, of course, she spent time on the continent, and they're fascinated by it. And then you get people from England and Scotland coming and going, who was she? Because we don't hear about her. We don't. And I say she was born in Scotland, a British princess. But yes. So William Craven was one of those. One of the many people who were dedicated to Elizabeth Stuart for whatever reason. There was something about Elizabeth, wasn't there, and about her her sheer personality, her charm, and everything about her that inspired countless gentlemen to say, "We are now swords at your service," kind of thing, and we will get your ancestral lands back for you and your sons. This is after Frederick had died, and of course, it was actually Elizabeth and William Craven about whom there were these rumours of a secret marriage. Encouraged, one
Mm.
has to say, in 1660 by the fact that when she did come back to England after the Restoration, she did go to live in Craven's house in Drury Lane in London. So, I mean, I think it's in a period when there was so much scandal and gossip going on, it probably did encourage that. Also, the two of them were seen as very old-fashioned and rather sweet, and I think it comes over from the contemporary chroniclers sort of talking about them, how he escorted her to the theatre and he would squire her around town, and everyone thought, oh, that's so cute, because of course at that stage they were the older generation and Charles and his court were kind of, raffish court over here, and Elizabeth seemed a bit old-fashioned. So I don't know, who knows? Certainly, we do know that that it's thought that Craven intended both Ashdown and a huge palace that he was building nearby called Hampstead Marshall, both to be for the use of Elizabeth. But like all the best love stories, of course, or depending on how you like, whether you like happy endings, it didn't have a happy ending. Elizabeth died in 1662. The house wasn't even finished until 1664. So it kind of remained as a sort of like it was dedicated to her memory, if you like. So
Right.
it's an amazing place to work. I mean, I feel incredibly privileged that, well, firstly, that it's still standing and that
Yes.
people can still come and see it. It's a beautiful piece of restoration architecture. It's
I
absolutely,
wish
well, I think so.
I wish I could go sometime. I mean, I've been wanting to go there for years,
Yeah, so
especially after
you
reading your
must.
book. Yeah.
Well, you must come and see it. I mean, it isn't open very often. That's the problem. It's only open.
Yeah.
The National Trust run it, but it's only open on Saturday and Wednesday afternoons, and it's
Right.
only
See,
open between April and October. So you've got to catch your moment. But
well, I suppose it's good to coincide that with a trip to Blenheim Palace, perhaps, it's pretty close by, and yeah,
absolutely. I mean, there are
it
quite a
has to be
few
done.
really interesting places
Yeah.
nearby, but certainly it's worth it's worth a little pilgrimage anyway, just on its own, because inside we have a very small part of what was known as the Craven collection of portraits, which were actually portraits that originally belonged to Elizabeth Stuart, painted
Ooh.
in. Yes, we get
Oh,
quite a lot of
entertaining. I like
art
that.
historians who come to take a look at them. So these were portraits of herself, her family, her court, painted mostly in the 1650s, 1640s, 1650s in Holland when they were in exile in The Hague. But we have, it's so interesting because, of course, it's a reflection of, it's like looking into her family album, if you like, because it's all the people who were important to her. So obviously there's a collection of her sons. There's a portrait of Prince Rupert of the Rhine that has people swooning when they see it because he's
Well,
obviously
that's
got
not
his
hard
own
to do.
fan club.
Yeah, that's not hard to do.
And then there's one of Charles
Mm.
II when he was only 19, and that's quite unusual because I haven't seen many pictures of a young Charles, not, like you see pictures of him when he was a child and you see the older Charles looking slightly more world weary and the merry monarch,
Mm.
but seeing Charles at 19 when he's still got quite a sort of sweet, fresh-faced look about him. It's a very interesting picture. I'm told by the experts it's not a good picture, but it's a very interesting picture. And then there's
It's
also
worth.
other people who are, worth seeing. Frances Cook. I love the story of Frances Cook and how she ran off. I mean, that's another one for a book, isn't it? How she
Wait,
ran off.
could you please tell us about that for those of us who
Viscountess
never.
Purbeck. So she was married, I think, now I get confused about this,
Oh, yes,
to
I'm
Edward
sorry. Yes,
Villiers. Yes,
yes,
the Villiers
yes,
brother.
who was
Yeah.
that's right. There was a really good book about that. What was it? I Who wrote that? Someone wrote a biography about her.
Mm.
about
Yes.
Frances?
Yes, I believe
Ah,
because
I can't remember.
they
Oh,
came to Ashdown to see the picture because we have one of the very few pictures of her that exist, and
wow.
it's the most beautiful, beautiful picture. But I mean, again, she has an extraordinary story. Left her husband, who was well, they said to have been cruel but also mad, ran off to the court of Elizabeth of Bohemia in The Hague. And it was while she was there that she had this portrait painted, which is now in the collection that is at Ashdown. So, you know, you stand there in front of all these pictures and it's like almost being able to touch the past and the people who were all part of this story. It's just incredible, but that's a very, very a beautiful portrait, and again another amazing story. So yes, we have all of this at Ashdown House. It's all
Wow.
definitely worth a visit.
Yeah, great. And I really loved how you put that. You said you can I love that, the feeling that you can be so close to the history,
Mm,
and I love that.
mm.
And I'm so glad that they have you because you have a clear love and appreciation for these figures and the time, and it's so good. So
Oh,
I'm
thank
very
you.
pleased.
Yes, I mean it is my passion. I think it's fair to say that I I think I could even probably say that whilst I was interested in 17th century history before I went to Ashdown, it was that kind of opened the door to a much broader interest for me in the period, because before that I'd read about it and I knew about it and I found it interesting. But I think it really made these people seem real to me and just brought the whole thing, just opened it all up for me. And I think, you know, and I mean, at the other end of the scale, we've got a painting there from the period of the Civil War, painted by William Dobson. So, you know, you've got it kind of covers all of these different elements of the history of the period. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why I like William Craven or find him so interesting, because he was born in 1608 and he didn't die until 1697. So he lived
Wow.
through that. I know, all the way
Did
through
almost
that
all of it. Wow.
epic
You know,
scale.
that occurred to me.
Mm.
That's
So
brilliant. Yes.
so yes, the whole concept of what his life must have been like, starting off right at the beginning, you know, how that must have appeared to him by the time he was sort of pottering around his garden in Drury Lane, apparently just before he died. So, you know, I mean, what a man he would have been to have talked to about all of that, really.
Oh, yes. I don't know if it was you, but I recall someone posted, perhaps it was on X, but an image of the gates or pillars that were supposed to
Oh
be.
yes,
Do
at
do you,
Hampstead Marshall. Mm.
yes, I think so. Did
The
you take
palace
it?
that was going to be, yes, the palace that was
Yes.
going to be, that was meant for Elizabeth,
I
which was
found that
built.
quite moving. It was moving to see
It's
that.
yes, well, you see, we come to Ashdown, you can just nip down the road and go and visit what's left of Hampstead Marshall,
Oh,
because he'd built this immense palace, which was again intended to be for her, and the original plans of that are in the Bodleian Library in Oxford, and you can go and look at them, coloured in crayon by drawn by William Wynd, the architect, of the whole beautiful house, and then within 50 years it had burned down and all that's left is
oh,
these gate pillars standing in the field, and you can find bits of masonry from the house just lying around in the fields. It's, yes, again a really a very atmospheric place where you feel so close to what happened there. So yeah, extraordinary.
wow, that's incredible. Um, did Craven have a connection to Stokesay Castle in Shropshire? Because I lived near there, and I
Yes.
remember his name associated with that.
That's right. Yes. Well, he, again, that was one of the, I mean, they were, he was the fifth richest man in England when his father died in 1618. Well, I say man, he was 16 years old. Um, and they had estates everywhere. And one of the big, they had a big collection of Shropshire estates, and Stokesay was one of their estates. And again, I love the fact that that fabulous gatehouse at Stokesay was the work of, well, not William Craven personally, but he came back to England during the 1630s, like 20s. He would been serving as a soldier abroad. But as part of his trip back, he was talking about the redesign of the build of that particular gatehouse at Stokesay and the redesign of some elements of the castle. So, yeah, I mean, and it's so different, isn't it? It's so different from the other style, the later building style, because he was a great builder. He was architecture was one of his passions, and so we've got Ashdown House, we've got Combe Abbey near Coventry was built for him as well. But Stokesay, with it's just perfect, that beautiful little gatehouse, which looks kind of like a throwback to a previous era. So these were all his projects.
Yes. And they have a lovely little tea room in there. Well, they used to. I don't know if they still do. But it was a really lovely place. And my family and I used to have picnics. Oh, sorry about that. My family and I used to live near Ludlow. Craven Arms. Craven Arms.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And we used to go there regularly, and it's so nice to have that. For those who don't know about Stokesay Castle, there is an old medieval castle there, and there is this Stuart era gatehouse, and it's a beautiful shade of sort of golden yellow. I don't know if that's the original color, but it's beautiful, and just that alone is worth a visit, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Stokesay's fabulous.
I was wondering, is there any 17th century music you like? Do you listen to any music when you write? And if so, what would that be?
I don't listen to music when I write because I can't. I'm one of these people who gets very easily distracted. So I can't listen. I mean, I can maybe have music on in the background sometimes if there's no lyrics, but generally I like to write. I was going to say in silence, but that's not possible when you've got two dogs in the house. But I do really love music from that period, because when I was a long time ago, I was a chorister from the age of 12.
Ooh,
And
wow.
we used to, yes, we used to sing sacred music, church music in both in the church where our choir was based, but also in cathedrals around the country. And my favourite there was music from that particular era. I mean, I absolutely loved anthems by William Byrd. I'm going to count him because although I know he did a lot of his composing under the Tudors, he did still kind of he was still around in the Stuart era. Purcell's sacred music as well, of course, absolutely beautiful. And
Definitely.
John Blow and Owen Dowland's lute music. And it was so funny. I just couldn't believe this. This morning, I'd gone into a town nearby, and there was somebody playing the lute in the town centre. Now I've never
No
ever
way.
heard, I know I'd never ever heard that before, but it was just absolutely beautiful, and it was it felt kind of incongruous but also really lovely. And a lady was walking past Sainsbury's with her shopping bags, and I heard her say to a friend, I could just listen to that forever. And that's kind of how I feel about it, because there's something very soothing about listening to lute music from the 17th century. So yes, I mean I do still sing, although not the same sort of music, but I still have quite an interest in early to the Stuart period, but also as you get towards the 18th century as well, that when you get onto Vivaldi and Telemann and people like that. And
Oh, yes.
I had to learn Scarlatti for my piano
Oh,
lessons.
that's not easy.
It was not.
Gosh. Oh, dear me.
But no, give me
Wow.
a bit of trumpet music, I think, some Telemann perhaps, because I absolutely love that. So yeah.
Yes. I sort of annoy my husband because he doesn't like the sort of bombastic music. He says, "Oh, it's bombastic." And I'm like,
Mm.
"Bring those baroque trumpets."
Yes,
Yes.
the trumpets are fantastic.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. But Makes me want to learn the lute, hearing that
Oh, I
somebody's done
know.
that. That's brilliant.
It's
Yes, more
amazing.
of that, please. Yes. All right. I'd like to know if you had a fantasy dinner party in the Stuart period, who would you invite and what would you serve?
What a great question. But honestly, how do you choose just a handful of people? And I'd end up with a banquet or something because there's so many people that I'd love to meet and talk to.
Well, it's a
And then, of
fantasy,
course,
so why not? You can have a big hall full
a
of
huge hall.
people.
The only trouble is that's a bit like when you have something like a wedding reception and then you never get the chance to talk properly to the people you really want. So, but then of course the other thing is if you were only going to have say half a dozen people, then I would worry that they didn't get on with each other
Mhm.
because I love, for example, I would love to talk to Nell Gwyn. I'd absolutely love that, but I really am interested in Catherine of Braganza. I'm very interested in
Mhm.
the new book that's come out. I'm really looking forward to
Yes.
reading that. But I know that Nell Gwyn admired Catherine and actually quite liked her, but I don't know if it was mutual. So putting the two of them together at a dinner party could be awkward. But I'd certainly like to invite both of them. Obviously,
Yeah.
William Craven has to be there, but
Mhm.
I might monopolise him. And I thought. And when I was thinking about Craven, I thought, well, you could invite Rupert. They were great friends, but then they might just chat on about the old times, fighting together, and that might be a bit boring for everybody else. But certainly, William Craven would obviously have to be there. And kind of going back to one of the other periods that I studied, somebody I always wanted to meet, though I'm not sure if I'd invite him to dinner, is Robert Catesby, the gunpowder plotter, because
Oh,
he
that's interesting.
well, I just think when I was researching that particular book, everybody said of Robert Catesby. I mean, again, there's something about these handsome and charismatic men, isn't there? But
Mhm. Yes.
there must have been something so persuasive about him. If you leave aside even, he must have been devoted to his religious beliefs, but to be able to inspire other people to follow him. Um, Although I would be tempted to say to him, you knew you'd been betrayed, so why did you carry on? There's a lot of questions I have that need answers. So I would like to meet Robert Catesby. I think it might be quite interesting. Um, and one other person from the period who I only found out about very recently, and I haven't had chance to do much research into this at all, but I'm going to go there next, I think, is I discovered, because I do my own family tree history as well, and I had
Oh,
no
cool.
idea that I had Quaker ancestors um, from the sixth, well, from the Restoration period, really.
Oh, you
Um,
rebel,
and
you.
I know, Quakers. I'm so proud of them. I'm so proud of them. They were called Grimshaw, and they were very active in establishing Quakerism in Yorkshire. But my
Wow.
9 times great grandmother sounds like a brilliant woman. I really want to meet her because she was actually applied on her own behalf to use her house as a Quaker meeting place. And this was in 1670, of course, when
Wow.
that was never going to make it was brought an awful lot of problems onto the family, the fact that they were such prominent Quakers. So it was very strange because I was actually writing The Other Gwyn Girl and, sort of looking at Nell Gwyn and Charles II, and it's impossible. Well, it's impossible for me to dislike Charles II because I mean he's clever and he's funny. But then I was reading about what happened to the Quakers and the persecution and all
Mm.
that sort of thing, and I just trying to hold those two things in my head at the same time was
Yeah.
really interesting challenge. So
Yeah.
that's something I think I'm going to look at next. So if I got all of those
Cool.
people around a table together, I'm not sure whether it would be interesting or fun or whether we'd just sit in silence going, that's a very interesting
Yeah.
carrot pudding.
And I don't think they would be the type to engage in a food fight.
No, definitely not.
No.
But no, I fancied the carrot pudding because I love bread and butter pudding, and I found this
Mhm.
fabulous 17th century pudding recipe where you basically
Nice.
make bread and butter pudding, but then you put carrot in it so it feels really healthy. And then
Sounds good.
I know, you see, it's kind of good for you. It's got
Mm,
all those eggs and butter and cream and stuff in it, but it's really healthy because it's got carrots. So I think I would do that, and maybe then introduce them to a few modern dishes and see what they thought of that. That might distract
right.
them from any of the other awkward bits that we might not be able to talk about.
Oh, that's great. I love it. Wow, it sounds like a really good party. And that carrot recipe, I am going to have to ask you to send that to me
Mm,
if you don't mind,
I
because
will.
I
No, of
might be
course.
able to do that and make that for the people who don't really like carrots in my house sometimes.
Ah,
For them.
very useful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
yes, it's
Anyway.
full of butter and all kinds of
Oh,
lovely things.
great. All right. Well, thank you so much, Nicola. Thank you for chatting with me today. It's been a pleasure.
Well, thank you. I've had such a good time. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks. Bye.